We're going to invite everyone to come and grab a seat so that we can start on time as much as possible. I love starting on time, so come and grab your seat. As we prepare to get started, if you have a phone, electronic device, anything that makes any extra noises, I invite you to turn that off or in airplane mode, on silent, just so that no extra noise distracts us from our evening together tonight. As always, I want to invite you to take note of our exits on all sides, including behind our bima back here. If it is needed, our facilities are down the hall that way. My name is Rabbi Jill Perlman, and I am honored to have you here for our second installment of what we call Isaiah Speaks. So a word about our schedule tonight. We're going to first listen to our presentation from our speaker on both the legal and constitutional issues arising in the current administration, oh my goodness, as well as the issues of free speech and anti-Semitism on our campuses. We know we are packing in a lot tonight. There's no way we're going to possibly get through everything, but we are really thankful to the Dean for coming tonight, sharing his thoughts with us, and of course to all of you for engaging in these topics. After Dean Chemerinsky's presentation, we're going to have just a short time for questions in our larger group here, and then we're going to invite everyone to join us for facilitated small group discussions in our Oneg room. Our Isaiah Speaks series is based in the root idea and the lived out belief that we here at Isaiah are capable of having difficult conversations together. And it is precisely here in sacred community where we should be talking about the most important, the most relevant issues of the day. Our namesake, the prophet Isaiah, did not shy away from difficult questions, and neither do we. So we invite those in the room to please stay after our main presentation and continue the conversation in small groups right in the Oneg room for about 15, 20 minutes or so. There are snacks. There's homemade desserts, right? And great conversation. And the Dean is going to join us table to table, so you do not want to miss that. He'll also be here if you need to have your book signed, and indeed there'll be books for continual purchase if you didn't have a chance to do that out in our foyer as well. So a few reminders as we prepare to begin. Isaiah is a home to all across the political spectrum, so let us remain vigilant in how we speak to one another. Yes, we bring different opinions to the table. We bring different life experiences too. So let us be sure to lift one another up, not diminish others in our speech as we remember that we are indeed one, right? We're one community. As we engage tonight, may we not forget the Talmudic teaching that a sanctuary must always be built with windows. Look around, we're definitely accomplishing that. Why with windows? Because windows look out into the world, and so must we. May our conversations tonight lead us all to better days. I really want to thank our Isaiah Speaks team who really made tonight happen. Naomi Greenstone, Peter Metzner, Judy Carney, Dave Bressler, Leslie Shafton, Sue Adler-Bressler, and Stephen Weinzimmer. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And more Isaiah Speaks programs to come in the future. But for now, I want to turn things over to Naomi to introduce our speaker.
Good evening. I am honored tonight to introduce Dean Chemerinsky. You probably read his bio, which speaks for itself. You know he serves as the Dean of Berkeley Law. He's the author of 19 books, in fact, my con law book, including case books and treatises about constitutional law, and his recent book is for sale in the lobby, No Democracy Lasts Forever. Timely topic. In 2016, he was named a Fellow of the American Academy of Sciences, and in 2022, he was the President of the Association of American Law Schools. In 2024, the National Jurist magazine named him as the most influential person in legal education in the United States. In 2024, he was also the target of anti-Semitism at Cal. He went to Harvard Law School, and he frequently argues appellate cases, including before the United States Supreme Court. I, however, want to tell you about how I know the dean. In 1997, I was a lucky law student at UCLA with a handful of friends who won a dinner at his house as part of a Public Interest Law Foundation auction. I remember that dinner. I don't know that Dean does, because he, I think, hosts those every year. In 1998, he was the best bar prep instructor. He taught constitutional law, and not that he would remember me or probably about 30 of you here. He taught everyone across the country who took Barbary. And shortly after graduating, when I became active with the Anti-Defamation League, I learned about his annual mesmerizing lecture on US Supreme Court highlights, where he takes 90 minutes or so to walk you through the whirlwind of new decisions every spring. He is someone I've admired for over 20 years, and I'm honored that he accepted our invitation to speak tonight about a couple of timely topics: constitutional issues in the new administration and free speech and anti-Semitism on college campuses. Without further ado, I welcome Dean Erwin Chemerinsky.
Thank you so much for the incredibly kind introduction. It's truly my great honor and pleasure to be with you. I was so delighted when I got the invitation to speak, and I said, "What do you want me to talk about?" And they said, "Well, will you talk about anti-Semitism on campus? And will you talk about constitutional issues for the new administration?" And I said, "Those are two very different topics." They said, "Yes, but please do both." So it's one of those two for the price of none. I mean, it's a... Let me talk about them in that order. And I want to start by talking about what did happen at my house, in my backyard, on April 9th of 2024. A little bit of background: as long as I've been a dean, I've always had all of the entering students over my house for dinner. We do it over about 7 nights because we have so many entering students in our JD and LLM program. And the only time since I became a dean in 2008 that I didn't do this was in 2020 because of COVID, and then again in 2021 because of COVID. And so in the spring of 2023, the presidents of the graduating class said, "You didn't have us over for dinner. Will you do it this year before our graduation?" And we agreed to, and in April of 2023, over several nights, we had all of the graduating students over. Last March, the presidents of the third-year class came to us and said, "You didn't have us over for dinner when we started law school in the fall of 2021. Will you have us before our graduation?" And of course, the answer had to be yes. And so we scheduled the dinners for April 9th, 10th, and 11th, and any graduating student could come to any of those 3 nights. Exactly a week before, a poster went up on every bulletin board in the law school and online. It depicted me holding a bloody knife and fork and with blood around my lips, and the heading was "Boycott Zionist Chem." It wasn't objecting to anything that I had said or done. The only demand was that the University of California divest from Israel. As you might guess, the law school has nothing to do with the investment policy of the University of California. A couple of days later, I got an urgent message from the presidents of the student government of the law school. They told me that unless we canceled our dinner, that it was going to be disrupted. And I said, "We're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to cancel the dinner. And it's absolutely fine for people to come and protest so long as they don't disrupt the event. We have clear rules that law school events can't be disrupted." The day of the dinner, Tuesday, April 9th, my wife and I were in front and greeted all of the students as they arrived. And then everyone goes into the backyard, and there's wine and hors d'oeuvres before dinner, and then it's a buffet line. As soon as everyone had gone through the buffet line and was seated, and I was always the last person to go through and had just sat down, the president of the Law Students for Justice in Palestine, who was responsible for the poster the week before, took a microphone out of her backpack, stood on the steps, and began a speech. In all the years we've done the dinners, there's never been any remarks or speech by me or anybody else. So I immediately got up and said, "This isn't okay. It's not acceptable for you to come and use our backyard for what I found a very offensive pro-Palestinian speech. The student continued. My wife grabbed the microphone from the student when she wouldn't stop. It went viral, and in a way that I could have never imagined. We then got hundreds of death threats. There was an organized campaign with thousands of messages to have us fired, and also an organized campaign on our behalf. The only reason this happened that I can figure is that I was Jewish. Again, it wasn't protesting anything that I had said or done, and I have no doubt if I was a non-Jewish dean, it wouldn't have happened. This, of course, was one of so many anti-Semitic incidents that occurred on campus across the country last year. Some of what we saw was truly chilling. There's stories of campuses across the country, of Jewish students in dormitories that had swastikas painted on their doors. There was a sign at George Washington University that said, and I'm quoting, "The final solution." What is more chilling than that? On many campuses, including on the Berkeley campus, Jewish students were yelled at, including with the, quote, "Go back to Poland." A Columbia student who was in a disciplinary proceeding said, "Zionists don't deserve to live." This year has been quieter on campus across the country. It's been quieter at Berkeley. It's been quieter nationally. It's interesting to think about why. But still, after October 7th of 2024, we saw on over 100 campuses pro-Hamas demonstrations. On the Berkeley campus, one of the signs held up on October 8th said, and I quote, "Israel deserves 10,000 October 7th. You know the campanile on the Berkeley campus, somebody hung from the top down, "Long live the resistance," with the signs Hamas. We can then talk about what on other campuses. I think it's important for all of us to think about why has there been this increase in anti-Semitism? And then more important, what can we do about it? The why is hard, and we should resist simple causal explanations. Some of it undoubtedly is turning over a rock and letting anti-Semitism that was always there get expressed. I've seen this in another way. I've been writing op-eds in newspapers for the last 40 years. I have an op-ed tomorrow in the Los Angeles Times about what's going on in Washington. I have an op-ed coming out later this week in the San Francisco Chronicle. Something different started really around 2016. I'm used to getting hate messages from op-eds. But for the first time, for op-eds that had nothing to do with religion or Israel, I would get anti-Semitic comments, including anti-Semitic slurs. Nick Goldberg was the opinion page editor at the Los Angeles Times, and he wrote an op-ed about around the same time. Messages to him were just vile in the expression of anti-Semitism. And I want to be clear, I do not think that criticizing Israel's policies are anti-Semitic, any more than criticizing United States policies make one anti-American. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm speaking of anti-Semitism. When you think of the things that were said on campus across the country, or just think of an image of me holding a bloody knife and fork with blood around my lips, the anti-Semitic trope of blood libel. That's anti-Semitism. There's no other way to describe it. I think some of what's gone on college campuses, and it's gone on for a number of years that way, is the way in which the left has become strongly anti-Israel, and that anti-Israel sentiment can get expressed as anti-Semitism. A narrative has developed on campuses, especially on the left, that Israel is an illegitimate settler colonial state, and that therefore, if you're going to be progressive and you're going to support those who are oppressed, you need to be anti-Israel. And so quickly that can turn into expression of anti-Semitism. It is a false narrative. I don't know what it means to be settler colonialist. I mean, obviously, the United States is the ultimate settler colonialist country. And when you're talking about a nation on land that's been there for thousands of years, there's no rational way to figure out who's the rightful owner of the land. Over the last several years, really over the last couple of years, the positions of those on the left have changed. Now it's hardened into a very strong, Israel should not exist at all. You've all heard the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. That's saying it should be an entirely Palestinian country. Or a sign that was seen on campuses at Berkeley and elsewhere, we don't want no two-state, we want 48, meaning we want to go back to pre-1948 when there was no Israel. If the discussion was, how do we deal with the problems with regard to the West Bank and provide rights to Palestinians? Or if the discussion was, how do we create a two-state solution? It's so very different than now, where the position has become that Israel is illegitimate. And in this regard, if we talk about causes, we have to accept that some of the blame goes to Israel too in its policies. That I believe, as I'll talk about, that I think it's possible to be strongly supportive of the existence of Israel. I would describe myself as a Zionist, but also strongly supportive of rights for Palestinians. And I think that Israel, in order to be legitimate, has to be a democracy as well as a Jewish state. And to the extent that it doesn't provide civil rights for Palestinians, it's bringing on itself some of the criticism and some of the problems. So what do we do about it? Again, just as there's no simple explanation as to cause, nor is there a simple solution. But I think we need to do many things. First, we have to do a better job of educating. After all, I work at an educational institution. That's what we do. I am constantly stunned by how little my students, Jewish and non-Jewish, whatever their views with regard to the Middle East, know about the history of the Middle East. I'll tell an anecdote. In November, I was in a conversation with some students that related to the Middle East, and I said, do you know that today is the anniversary of the signing of the Balfour Declaration? Now, one of the students I was talking to had ever heard of the Balfour Declaration. And of course, it's so important in understanding the history of the Middle East, because that's when England said that there should be a Jewish state, where Israel now exists. I think that our generation, and we're all basically from the same generation, has done a poor job of explaining why the existence of Israel as a Jewish state is so important. When I grew up, it was imbued, maybe it was obvious, but we haven't sufficiently explained that to the successive generations, and we need to do so. Second, we need to make sure that Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is enforced. Title VI says that recipients of federal funds cannot discriminate on the basis of race. The federal government has said that this includes national origin and discrimination on the basis of religion against Jews, against Muslims, violates Title VI. You might remember all the encampments that occurred on campuses last spring. A federal court in Los Angeles over the summer, in a case called Frankel v. University of California, found that what UCLA had done in allowing the encampment, which blocked Jewish students from having access, which led to harassment of Jewish students, violated Title VI. Now, it's important to talk a little about what Title VI means. It says that recipients of federal funds cannot discriminate. That includes they cannot have a hostile environment on the basis of race or religion. And the legal standard is they can't be deliberately indifferent when there's a hostile environment or discrimination. That doesn't mean that they can or should punish speech. In the United States, even hateful speech, even anti-Semitic speech, is protected by the First Amendment. But that doesn't mean they can or should do nothing. They can't be deliberately indifferent. Last May, Catherine Lehman, who was then the Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights, sent out a Dear Colleague letter to all of the college universities across the country. And she said, just what I'm expressing to you. Even if speech is protected by the First Amendment, it can still violate Title VI by creating a hostile environment, and campuses can't be deliberately indifferent. Now, there's so many things that she said that campuses can do. Campus officials can condemn anti-Semitic speech when it's there. Campus officials can provide protection for students to make sure that they're not harassed. Campus provide trainings with regard to anti-Semitism. And I think it's essential that we insist that campuses adhere to Title VI and be vigilant in making sure that there's not discrimination, that there's not harassment, that there's not exclusion of Jewish students. In terms of things to do, we also should avoid false dichotomies. We can support, as I said, Israel as a Jewish state, but also support Palestinian rights. We can mourn those who lost because of the massacre by Hamas on October 7th, but also mourn the loss of life of those who died in Gaza. And we should try to resist the attempt by people to oversimplify, to draw false dichotomies. I think it's important that we who are Jewish also be a force for pressing Israel to respect the civil rights of all. Israel must be secure. It must have secure borders. But I don't think that's inconsistent with protecting the rights of all and adhering to international law. And finally, I urge you to support the Jewish students at campuses across the country. And so whether it's, we're talking about the community colleges here in Contra Costa with a member of the board, or at Berkeley, there are Hillels, there are Chabads, and they really need your support. The Jewish students need your support now. And so anything you can do to help them would be enormously important. So that's my first talk, and I'm glad to take questions about it. Now a totally different talk. No democracy lasts forever. Democracies are there until they're not. We all know of countries around the world that weren't democracies and aren't anymore. I believe that the United States democracy faces a crisis. Now, I believed this before January 20th of 2025. I wrote a book, which they're very kindly selling, titled No Democracy Lasts Forever. I finished the manuscript in the summer of 2023. It was published in August 2024. So this isn't a conclusion that I've come to just because of the events of the last 3 weeks, but certainly the last 3 weeks make me worry more than I ever imagined I would as to the future of American democracy. Why did I start with this fear? Well, some of it is that the United States government has lost the faith of the people. The Pew Research Institute does a survey every year about public confidence in government. They started it in the late 1950s, and they've done it every year since. The high water mark of confidence in American government was 1964. 77% of those surveyed expressed approval of the United States government and what it was doing. Last year, when they did the survey, it was 20% of the people expressing confidence in American government. And you see this in terms of the branches of the federal government. Last summer, when the Gallup poll was done for approval of Congress, its approval was at 16, and that might be 16 people, not 16%. The Supreme Court has its lowest approval rating in history. A poll done by the Quinnipiac University Survey Center last year found only 30% expressed approval of the Supreme Court, and 59% of those surveyed expressed disapproval of the Supreme Court. A Gallup poll had only 25% expressing confidence in the court. A study that came out in January found that the American courts have lost legitimacy faster than they've ever measured in any country in the world. Can a democracy survive if people lose faith in the government? I do not mean this to be a political comment at all, but if I had to explain the results of the November 2024 election, I think a lot of it is that people are dissatisfied with government and they want to change. And Donald Trump was perceived as a candidate of change. Kamala Harris was perceived, fairly or unfairly, as the candidate of the status quo. At the same time, our country is more polarized than it's been since Reconstruction. Political scientists have developed measures of this. One of the measures is to look at the approval rating for a president from his party compared to the other party. When Donald Trump was president in his prior term, 88% of Republicans surveyed expressed approval. Only 7% of Democrats surveyed expressed approval. That is the largest gap that's been measured in history. The second largest gap was when Joe Biden was president. Can a democracy survive when the country is so deeply polarized? What I set out to do in the book was try to explain why there's the crisis of democracy. And I point to a number of choices that were made in drafting the Constitution that have come to haunt us. The Electoral College. It was a terrible way of choosing a president when it was designed in 1787. It was based on the founders lacking faith in the people. Alexander Hamilton said in the Federalist Papers that we should have elites choose the president, not trust the masses. The Electoral College was based very much on a desire to protect states with enslaved populations in their political strength. Southern states obviously weren't going to let their enslaved population vote, but they still wanted to get benefit in choosing the president from that population. And the Electoral College did exactly that, because the state's electors is the sum of its representatives and senators. And before they decided on the Electoral College at the Constitutional Convention, they decided in allocating seats in the House of Representatives that enslaved people would count as 3/5 of a person. This isn't revisionist history. At the Constitutional Convention, Hugh Williamson, a delegate from North Carolina, praised the Electoral College because it would help the state of North Carolina get a political benefit from the enslaved population. None other than James Madison, a delegate from Virginia at the Constitutional Convention, said the same thing. In the 20th century, the Electoral College didn't matter. There wasn't one instance where the loser of the popular vote then became president of the Electoral College. It happened in 2000 and in 2016. It almost happened in 2004. If John Kerry had prevailed in Ohio, he had been chosen president despite losing the popular vote. And if 42,000 votes in 3 states had come out differently in 2020, then Trump would have beaten Biden. Because of population shifts and partisan realignment, it's likely this is going to continue to happen in the years to come. Another choice made in drafting the Constitution that haunts us today is giving every state 2 senators. At the time the Constitution was written, it didn't matter very much. The difference from the most populous state to the least populous state was about 12-1. Today, the difference between California and Wyoming, the most and least populous state, is 68-1. I can put it to you another way. In the first 2 years of the Biden presidency, remember there were 50 Democratic senators and 50 Republican senators? The 50 Democratic senators represented 42 million more people than the 50 Republican senators. And of course, it's all made worse because of the filibuster that lets a minority in the Senate be able to block things. The third branch of government created by the framers was the House of Representatives. It was the one part of the federal government that was meant to be directly representative. But what's changed there is partisan gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is the political party that controls the legislature, draws election districts to maximize seats for that party. California is one of a handful of states that doesn't experience that because we have independent districting commissions. But when all the other states are drawing their legislative districts, and here I'm speaking about the congressional districts, partisan gerrymandering very much exists. Partisan gerrymandering isn't new. It takes its name from a governor of Massachusetts early in American history, Elbridge Gerry. But what's changed is because of sophisticated computer programs, it's possible to engage in partisan gerrymandering with far more precision than ever before. The leading Supreme Court case about this in 2019 came out of North Carolina. North Carolina is a purple state, and went for Obama in 2008, for the Republican candidates since, but always close. In 2020, Trump beat Biden in North Carolina by 1.35%. When Republicans gained control of the North Carolina legislature, they set out to engage in partisan gerrymandering. And they were open. At that time, there were 13 congressional seats from North Carolina. They said they wanted to draw maps that would give Republicans control of 10 of 13 seats. They had a computer draw 3,000 different maps. And they chose the map that was most likely to give Republicans control of 10 of 13 seats. Shouldn't surprise you that it worked. In 2016 and in 2018, Democrats and Republicans got an almost even number of votes statewide for congressional seats. But Republicans won 10 of 13 seats. In 2019, in Rucho versus Common Cause, the Supreme Court said federal courts cannot hear challenges to partisan gerrymandering. No matter how extreme, federal courts can't find it to be unconstitutional. And of course, the other branch of government created besides the President and the Senate and the House is the Supreme Court. And I think that one of the crucial things about the Supreme Court is the way in which it's contributed to the crisis of democracy. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission is one of the worst decisions in history in saying that corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money to get candidates elected or defeated for office. It follows from an earlier decision that said that anyone can spend as much as they want. Elon Musk spent $275 million to get Donald Trump elected as president. There's something inconsistent with democracy if this is how we go about choosing a president. In 2013, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional key provisions of the Voting Rights Act and said the court's preventing challenges to partisan gerrymandering. If we're going to talk about the flaws in the Constitution, we have to face the tragic mistakes that were made with regard to race. We have to also realize that the internet and social media, while having tremendous benefits in terms of speech, are contributing very much to problems in democracy today. The latter half of the book is where I want to talk about what we can do about it. And I have a number of proposals of things that can be done without constitutional amendments. Some things would require a constitutional amendment. I can talk about them. And of course, there's going to be a point in our history where we're going to have a new constitution. No constitution lasts forever. And we should start thinking about the when and the how. Well, this is the book that I wrote in 2023. But what I was asked to talk about now is the much more salient and urgent threat to democracy that we're seeing. If I were to imagine a path towards authoritarianism, this is where we are right now. Think about what it would be to create a path towards authoritarianism. Undermine checks and balances. Because core to the Constitution, as we learned in middle or high school, is the notion of checks and balances. What Donald Trump has said, and it's only 3 weeks, is that he gets to control federal spending. If you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 gives the power of the purse to Congress. The framers even said that every spending bill has to start with the House of Representatives because they wanted the most representative part of government to be the one that controlled spending. What Donald Trump has said is that he gets to freeze and refuse to spend money that's been appropriated by federal statute. We saw it 2 weeks ago tonight when Trump announced a massive freeze of federal expenditures. We saw it a week ago tonight when Trump said he was shutting down the United States Agency for International Development because it didn't cooperate with Elon Musk and his so-called Department of Government Efficiency. It's clear under the Constitution that the president has no authority to refuse to spend money that's been appropriated by federal statute. The way it works is Congress passes a spending bill. The president can sign it or veto it. If he vetoes it, Congress can override the veto by 2/3 votes both out of Congress. But the president doesn't then get yet another veto of choosing to refuse to spend money. As you may know, federal district courts have issued preliminary injunctions finding that the president has no constitutional authority to refuse to spend money. In fact, in 1974, Congress passed a statute called the Empowerment Control Act that says that the president cannot refuse to spend money appropriated by federal statute. Donald Trump is not the first president to try to impound money. Richard Nixon did so, though not nearly on the basis we've seen in the last few weeks. And every court, including the United States Supreme Court, found that the impoundment of money was illegal. But Congress in 1974 adopted a statute saying the president cannot impound funds. It reinforces the notion of separation of powers. It reinforces that Congress has control over the spending power. When Russell Vought, who's now the head of Office of Management and Budget, testified at his confirmation hearings, he said he believes the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional because the president has the authority to spend money. In November, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal taking the position that the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional. If that's so, then what we've done is transfer the spending power, the quintessential legislative power, from Congress to the president. But the president has claimed control of spending in another way as well. You might have read that President Trump announced that virtually all federal employees would have the option of a buyout, that if they agreed by February 7th to leave their job, they would get paid through the end of September. Now, this obligates the government to spend money. The president doesn't have that authority either, and a federal district court has issued an injunction in this regard. So one thing that could undermine our government is undermining checks and balances and separation of powers. And that's what we've seen with regard to the spending power. A second thing that I would say is a path towards authoritarianism is ignoring the Constitution and federal laws. We are only 3 weeks into the Trump presidency, and yet I could spend all of the rest of my time with you, and then some, just listing laws that have been violated by the Trump administration. Give some examples. Federal law says that members of federal agencies serve for fixed terms and can be fired only for just cause, which is defined in the law. In 1935, in Humphrey's Executive versus the United States, the Supreme Court said that Congress could limit the removal of members of agency in this way. 2 weeks ago, President Trump announced that he was firing Gwen Wilcox, who's a commissioner of the National Labor Relations Board. Her term goes for 2 more years until 2028, and under the terms of the law, she can only be fired for just cause, and there's no assertion of just cause. Last Thursday, President Trump announced he was firing the chair of the Federal Election Commission, who again has protection from statute. And the Supreme Court only a few years ago reaffirmed that Congress could limit removal of these individuals. The firing is illegal. Even worse, what President Trump is saying is he essentially has the ability to fire anyone who works in the federal government. Most federal employees have civil service protection. This isn't something new. Civil service was created in the 19th century in the Pendleton Act. It was meant to create a professional federal workforce. It was meant to make sure that we didn't have a spoils system based on patronage. But President Trump is taking the position that as the chief executive, he has the authority to fire anyone in the executive branch of government, that civil service doesn't matter. And we've seen this in a particularly insidious way. Already they've fired the FBI agents and Justice Department lawyers who investigated and prosecuted Donald Trump. Already they've said they're going to fire the FBI agents who investigated the January 6th insurrection and fire the assistant United States attorneys who prosecuted it. What is more inconsistent with the notion of the rule of law than this? And yet we're seeing constant law violations. Well, I'll give you another example. I mentioned Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. And I've had to explain to my students, it is not a federal agency. It has not been created by Congress. It is entirely outside the federal government. And yet, they've gone into federal agencies and demanded highly secret private information. They went to the Treasury Department and demanded knowing how all of the checks that are issued. for Social Security, for federal agencies, for everything. Last Friday, on February 7th, a federal judge in New York found that this was illegal as a violation of federal statutes and ordered the Department of Government Efficiency to turn back the information and destroy what they've had. We'll see if that happens. But giving to this giving this private body access to all this federal information is again a blatant violation of the law. Well, in addition to undermining separation of powers, in addition to ignoring the laws and the Constitution, maybe the most insidious is what we've seen just in the last couple of days, and that's the claim that the president doesn't have to abide by court orders. In a series of interviews over the last few months, Vice President J.D. Vance took the position that the courts have no authority over the president, and he explicitly said the president should just defy what the courts say. Yesterday, on the platform X, J.D. Vance repeated that the courts have no authority over legitimate acts of the president. And of course, it's up to the president to decide what's legitimate or illegitimate. You might have also seen that when the federal court in New York ruled against Musk and Doge last Friday, Musk, in all caps, said, impeach the judge. Today, a federal district court in Rhode Island said that though it had issued an order requiring that the freeze on federal funds be lifted, the United States government is not complying with that judicial order. Pause for a moment and think about this. The president is claiming that he doesn't have to comply with court orders. That, in other words, he can do whatever he wants and whatever he thinks best. That's fundamentally inconsistent with the notion of a constitutional democracy. There is a word for that, and the word is a dictator. And that's what's at stake here. At the same time, in terms of the path towards authoritarianism, if you look at other countries, you see that they very much try to undermine the media as a check and intimidate critics. Look at how ABC settled with Donald Trump, a truly frivolous claim. Look at what's going on now with CBS, turning over notes that they, under the First Amendment, don't have to reveal, and Trump increasing the suit $20 billion. Or when the Des Moines Register published a poll before the election that was unfavorable to Trump, he's now sued them. Look at how the owner of the media companies, people like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Patrick Soon-Shiong, are currying favor, not criticizing what Trump has done. And at the same time, you see that critics are being chilled. I'll tell you a story here. A week ago Saturday, I wrote an email to all of the law school deans in the country. There are 200 of us, and we do have a common email. And I said, isn't it time for the deans to speak up for the rule of law? And I said, if not now, when? And if not us to speak up for the rule of law, who will be there to do so? And I said, if you're interested in being part of a conversation about this, here's my email address, and I'll set up an email among us. Out of 200 law school deans, 30 responded that they wanted to be part of the conversation. None from what you regard as the most prestigious law schools. And several deans who I know well, who have my cell phone, called me privately and texted and said they didn't feel comfortable speaking up. These include deans in blue states at the most elite universities. People are so afraid to speak up because they'll be targets for reprisal from the Trump administration. Do you know the famous passage from Martin Niemöller, a pastor from Germany, where he said, they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. They came for the trade unions. I didn't speak up because I was a trade unionist. They came for the gypsies. I didn't speak up. They came for the Jews and I didn't speak up. And then they came for me and no one was left to speak up. It's all I can think of as I see this silence that's there. Because again, the authoritarian governments come to power by chilling dissent. And if people aren't going to speak up now, if things get worse, they're going to be even less likely to speak up. So all of this causes me enormous concern about the future of democracy. It makes the title of the book seem sadly prescient in saying that no democracy lives forever. But I don't believe that all is lost. I hope that the courts will stand up as they have so far. If there's disobedience, other than the president, anybody else can be held in contempt of court. And there can be civil contempt that includes fines and jail. And I believe that even the Supreme Court, conservative it is, will stand up and find things like the repeal of birthright citizenship, or the impoundment of funds, the firing of civil service workers to be illegal. But in the end, I think it's not going to be just the courts that can save us. It's going to really require public opinion. It's going to require that all of us and all of the groups that we're part of express outrage at what's being done and stand up for democracy. I never imagined in my lifetime there'd be an existential moment for the future of democracy in the United States. But I don't think it's hyperbole to say we're at that moment now, and it's going to be up to all of us to take the actions to save American democracy. So those are my two talks. I was told to speak 45 minutes. I've done that. And now I'm glad to take questions about either of these.
We are so appreciative of everything that you have had to offer us today. I'm going to turn to those gathered here in the room. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Just a quick reminder that questions are questions as opposed to statements. Thank you so much. I'm going to go over here where I saw a hand up first, and feel free to share your name with us as well.
Hi, Larry Prozan. Did you find any legal rationale why the court gave the president basic immunity in its ruling last July?
Sure. The question was, did I find any legal rationale for why the court gave the president immunity? The case is Trump versus the United States. It was decided July 1st, 2024. And the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for anything done carrying out official duties pursuant to the Constitution or a statute. I think that there should be a hall of shame for certain Supreme Court cases. Dred Scott versus Sanford that held that enslaved people are property, not citizens. Plessy versus Ferguson that said that separate but equal is constitutional. Korematsu versus the United States that upheld the Japanese evacuation in World War II. I think Trump versus the United States belongs in the Hall of Shame. And let me explain why. The core of the rule of law is that no one, not even a president, is above the law. And what the Supreme Court said was that because of the desire to make sure that there's a president who will act in a vigorous and aggressive manner, you shouldn't have to fear criminal prosecution, so there's absolute immunity. Justice Sotomayor in her dissent gave hypotheticals. She said, imagine the president orders the Navy SEALs to assassinate political rivals. That's using his power as commander-in-chief, absolute immunity. She said, imagine the president takes bribes to issue pardons. The pardon power is part of the president's authority under Article 2, absolute immunity. So imagine the president orders the Justice Department to prosecute people for political retribution, absolute immunity. She concluded that sentence, quote, immune, immune, immune. Justice Jackson, in her dissent, in a footnote, I think put it well. She said, everyone agrees that the president can fire the attorney general. The issue in this case is, does the president have absolute immunity if he orders the attorney general assassinated? So it's a decision that may come to really haunt us because it says it doesn't matter how egregiously illegal the president's actions. It explicitly says it doesn't matter the president's motives. Absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. I hope you keep track of steps and have a pedometer. Exactly.
Where do you think the line is for the Supreme Court in supporting Trump? If they are willing to, in essence, let him murder someone or have someone murdered, what laws and constitutional provisions will they stand up for? Where's that
And
line?
I think John Roberts gave a state of the court message in late December of 2024. And one of the things that he talked about was how unacceptable it is for people to defy Supreme Court orders. And I think the court cares about its own institutional power. And I do not think that they will tolerate the president ignoring court orders. Now let me be more specific. I did not talk about something else the president did that was unconstitutional, an executive order to rescind birthright citizenship. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment says that all persons born or naturalized in the jurisdiction, within the jurisdiction of it, are United States citizens. In 1898, in United States versus Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court said everyone born in the United States is a United States citizen, regardless of the immigration status of their parents. And that's been the law ever since 1868. President Trump tries to change that by executive order, saying that after February 19th, only if your parents are a citizen or a lawful resident alien, being born here is enough for citizenship. I think the Supreme Court will rule against President Trump on that. Another example, I think the Supreme Court will declare the impoundment of funds, the refusal to spend money appropriated by federal statute, to be unconstitutional. Brett Kavanaugh said that in a different context as a judge on the D.C. Circuit. John Roberts said it as a lawyer in the Reagan administration in the 1980s. I don't think the Supreme Court's going to say that the president can fire all in the civil service and that there's no protections that can be provided to federal employees. So I think there are places where the Supreme Court will stand up to Trump. What happens if President Trump ignores the Supreme Court orders and defies them? Then we'll have a constitutional crisis greater than we've ever seen in this country. Because with rare exceptions, every president has complied with Supreme Court decisions, even when they strongly disagree with them.
Hi. Every conversation I feel like I have with friends and family and neighbors always ends with the same thing these days. Everybody feels overwhelmed, and the question is, what can we do? What can we, as individuals who have a free hour next week or can do something, can you give us some help with specific actions we can take?
We all have the most influence by working with others. And so organizations are key in this regard. I can stand back here. So think about the issues that you care most about and get in touch with the organizations that are working on them and offer to volunteer your time and to the extent you have resources, your financial support. The ACLU is bringing so many of these challenges now, but there's also other groups like Protect Democracy, Common Cause. They're bringing the lawsuits, they're bringing the challenges. And so I think the key is to get involved with organizations that are fighting and to be part of their fight.
Thank you. Getting back to anti-Semitism on campus, I recently read your book, Free Speech on Campus, and I thought one of the really good points you made was that one reason free speech is important is that we don't have an educational system that's essentially catechizing people, that's starting from premises and making sure you memorize it. You said we want students, not disciples. What do you do about the increasing tendency of some departments, not at the law school, but some other departments that you see, from starting from the first principle that settler colonialism, capitalism, imperialism, and Zionism are bad? Let's reason from that.
I feel strongly that departments and schools, as departments and schools, should not be taking positions on issues. Faculty can. All faculty, as individuals, can sign a petition, or it could be some of them. But as individuals, not as a department. And we saw Department of Ethnic Studies at a number of UC schools taking very, not just pro-Palestinian, but anti-Semitic positions. This past August, the regents of the University of California adopted a policy that now limits the ability of schools and departments to take positions as schools and departments or put things on their websites as schools and departments. And I applaud and support that position. Again, I support the ability of our faculty to say anything they want as individuals or as a group. But the law school at Berkeley, as an entity, doesn't and shouldn't take positions.
My question might be naive, but I've heard continually that people are afraid to speak up against Trump. I want to know, what are they afraid of? Are they afraid of losing their jobs, money? Are they physically afraid? I mean, this fear of not speaking up, what is the consequence? What will that be?
Sometimes for its individuals losing their jobs, I can tell you for deans of law schools, there's very much fear that their state, depending on where they are, or the federal government will do things to harm them. I was in a conversation literally today with a dean of a law school. We'll call it a red state. And he says that he's very afraid that if he were to speak up against Trump, the very conservative legislature would pull money from the school for clinics and other things, and he can't risk that. And universities are concerned. I mean, something else happened that I didn't talk about last Friday that really will put all medical research in the United States at universities in jeopardy. And it's more complicated, so it didn't get much attention. But as you know, medical schools, and more generally, science and engineering, is so dependent on federal money. And when there's a federal grant, the university uses a part of it so as to pay for the people who are working under it. And that can include everything from the lab technicians, the postdocs, to everybody else. And the federal government has historically said that a university who has a grant can use 50% of it to pay its overhead, and then 50% has to go to the form of research. Last Friday, the Trump administration unilaterally said it was going to reduce overhead to 15%. This will, and it's not hyperbole, end most medical research in the United States. Today, a federal court issued a temporary restraining order saying it's another illegal act by the Trump administration.
Thank you very much for being here. Incredible insights, so thank you. Two-part question. The first is, can the courts move quickly enough? Because he's flooding the zone with so many things each day to stay ahead of it. That's the first part.
Okay, the answer is yes, and we've already seen it. I'm teaching constitutional law this semester, and I've begun every day, including this morning at 8:40, with current events, telling my students both what's going on and the most recent court decisions. So I started today with the court decision that said that the Trump administration couldn't offer the buyout to federal employees, and the court decision that said that the Trump administration could not let the Musk team go into the Department of Treasury. There were a bunch of court orders just today, and I'm going to go into class tomorrow morning and start with them. And a little bit of an anecdote. On Monday, January 20th, President Trump announced the executive order to end birthright citizenship. And so I went into class the next day, and said, the President Trump has done this. The day after that, a federal district court in Seattle, Judge John Kuhnauer, issued a temporary restraining order that he's now made into a preliminary injunction to keep that from happening. It couldn't have occurred more quickly. I'll tell a little anecdote. In 1991, I was one of 4 people from the United States that was invited to go to Belarus to help them write a new constitution. And John Kuhnauer was one of the others, and then there were 2 others. And so I've known him since 1991, and I never would write a judge about a pending case. It's just inappropriate. But I sent him a 1-sentence email saying, "As you have been for over 30 years, you are my hero." And he sent me a nice note back. No one's going to intimidate John Kuhnauer. The question is, will they ignore John Kuhnauer?
And that was the second part of it's okay. The second part of it is what really happens? You alluded to a constitutional crisis, but what would that actually look like if you were to gameplay that?
I can tell you what it would look like. I can't tell you how it'll play out because it's never happened. What it'll look like is the Trump administration follows what J.D. Vance said yesterday and earlier. They're simply going to ignore the court orders. The court says, you have to spend the money, and the Trump administration says, we're not sending the checks. The court says, and you can pick, you have to give universities the 50%, and the Trump administration ignores it. Another thing I didn't talk about is Trump says he's going to move undocumented individuals to Guantanamo. A court has issued a temporary restraining order. Trump says, I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to do it anyway. If you have that systematic defiance of court orders, then no longer do you have the rule of law. Because I said the rule of law is that no one, not even the president, is above the law. What happens then? We've never seen that. There are rare instances where a president has disregarded a court decision, not repeated and systematic. Will it be contempt directed at the lawyers and the agency officials, since the president can't be held in contempt? Will it be that Congress will finally rise up and do something? Will it just be that the rule of law is shredded and Trump can do whatever he wants? No one at this moment in time can answer your question because we've never seen it in American history.
Would you talk about how the Helen Diller Institute might play a role in countering anti-Semitism as well as the assault on democracy?
I'm very proud that at the law school, we are the host for the Helen Diller Institute on Jewish and Israel Studies. It's the largest center for Jewish and Israel Studies west of the Mississippi at any university, and it's one of the largest in the country. And it constantly does programs on the campus, including for the law school, on issues related to Jewish studies in Israel. It's constantly bringing in speakers, and speakers from a variety of different viewpoints with regard to issues concerning Israel. It doesn't have an ideology that it's trying to put forward, and it brings in many visiting scholars from Israel who spend time at Berkeley Law. And it's a terrific program, and you can read about it on the website.
Dean, do you have any guiding advice for those of us who are leading moral institutions in this day and age, and what we should be doing?
The last thing I would ever do is try to give moral guidance to a rabbi. I won't answer that question, but I'll say I think what's so important for all who are in leadership positions is to be true to our values, that they're so important right now, and that all of us who have the wonderful benefit of a pulpit or a microphone need to use it to express a commitment to basic values that have been so important for this country for a long time and to the Jewish people for a much longer period of time.
Let us give a round of applause to the Dean. And it is not over yet. The Dean is going to stay and join our table conversation, so if you had that question that you are hanging on to, he might just be able to answer it. In a moment, I'll ask folks, you can head straight through the Oneg room doors. There's desserts there and all sorts of nice treats. Please find a seat at the table. And if there are not enough seats, don't worry. We're going to find more seats for you. There are additional, I want to let folks know there are additional books available for sale over here, and the Dean will be at the tables if you need something signed. Just one more moment, just one more moment. Shh. He'll be there to sign it. I do want to let you know that question I ask is a very serious one, and we have an amazing, what we call our Values in Action team here, our justice team here. And if you, please let me know if you want to get involved. Actually, raise your hand if you're on our leadership team. So many different folks here from our VIA team. Thank you for doing that work. who are alongside you will figure out ways that we can be responding in ways that are available to us to some of the challenges that we face today. I want to thank the Dean once again. Thank you to everybody who joined us online as well. We hope that you enjoyed tonight. And for those in the room, please join us in the ONAG room. Thank you so much.